Well, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. The Office of Higher Education is really delighted to host this opportunity this afternoon, talk about the Credential Registry Initiative. We have a group of panelists here today that want to walk you through where we are in the state and how ready, willing, and able we are to embrace this opportunity and engage with other partners in this endeavor. Um, our office is responsible for the licensing and accrediting of the independent colleges and our occupational schools. And so we want to make sure that Connecticut students are poised to take advantage of every single educational initiative available to them. And we understand that partnering with other states and other colleges and other communities is a key ingredient of this. I'm excited to learn more about the Credential Registry, and let me turn this over to Candace and get this webinar off the ground. Thank you so much for attending. Appreciate your activity. And if you do have questions towards the end, if you want to limit that and put that in the Q&A box, we'll pick those up at the end and do our best to get you answers as soon as possible. Candace?
Thanks, Tim. I'll start our quick chain of introductions. I am Candace Williams, the Director of Policy Research and Strategic Initiatives at the New England Board of Higher Education, the New England States Higher Ed Regional Compact. And NEBI has been leading a credential transparency initiative for the past few years alongside Credential Engine. I'll leave it there for now and pass it over to Sean.
Thank you, Candace. I'm Sean Seepersad. I'm the Chief Academic Officer over at the Office of Higher Education, and working closely with the Office of Workforce Strategies and with NEBI to get this Connecticut Credential Registry initiative off the ground. So I'll be talking a little later about what that looks like, and to mention the new system, and I'll be doing a little demo on that. Before I turn it over to Niall, I just wanted to say really quickly that the webinar is primarily geared towards our independent institutions of higher ed. I know we have some publics up attending the webinar as well. You're certainly welcome to listen in, but I just wanted to let you know for the publics that the process will be a little different from the independents. But this is good background information if you wanted to listen in as well. So thank you, and turn it over to Niall.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. Niall Demondo. I am the Chief of Staff for the Office of Workforce Strategy. We are really excited about this initiative. This is, one of the key pillars in the Governor's Workforce Council strategic plan. We think it really gives a incredible infrastructure for students, job seekers, policymakers, companies, educators, the whole 9 yards, to really leverage in order to make informed decisions about programs that are aligned to Connecticut's industries. So I will not go into details. There's a lot to cover today, but thank you all for joining. We're really excited to have the conversation. I'll turn it over to Jen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Briones, the project manager at Credential Engine. So my role is primarily managing our state and regional partnerships, including the partnership with NEBI, which of course includes OHE and OWS over in Connecticut. And yeah, just here to mainly listen in, contribute where I can, and answer any of your questions.
Awesome. Well, I'll kick us off by providing a regional overview to this project. NEBI began working on credential transparency with Credential Engine and 4 of the 6 New England states back in 2018, coming out of a Commission on Higher Education and Employability, which addressed the proliferation of new types of credentials, which we now have a lot more data on thanks to Credential Engine. Knowing that we have nearly 1 million unique credentials in the United States and close to 5,000 unique credentials in Connecticut, our project helps to bring efficiencies and understanding to the credential marketplace, address some of the confusion that students have about different credentials, meaning, content, quality, and value, bridge better connections between credentials, and also help institutions and employers better communicate about the alignment between programs and labor market demand. So when we talk about credentials, we are referring to anything from an apprenticeship or a badge or a short-term certificate through the traditional post-secondary education degrees, as well as state-issued licenses and things like that. So ultimately, by working with the 6 New England states and using Credential Engine's tools, what we hope to do is create an infrastructure that allows our residents, our training providers, our employers, and our policymakers to chart clearer paths to and from credentials and jobs, use a shared language and coalesce around needed skills and competencies, better integrate education and training information, labor market insights, skill and credential attainment in meaningful ways, and ultimately harness Credential Engine's tools and technologies to create a Zillow for education and training. So what are those tools that I reference? Jen, feel free to pop in anytime here, but I'll do a quick explanation. Credential Engine has created what's known as the Credential Transparency Description Language, which is linked open data fields or metadata that help us connect, describe, compare credentials, just as other technologies utilize metadata to make things like hotels, flights more searchable on the internet and easier to digest using things like APIs. The credentials that are published to the registry using the CTDL can be viewed in a beta app called the Credential Finder. So if you're interested to see what it looks like once a credential is published to the registry utilizing this language, you can check that site out. Charter Oak is one of our early adopters, so you will already see a few Connecticut credentials there. And our project, our regional project, as well as Connecticut's state project, is part of a larger national initiative with over 17 states and regions participating and really focusing on credential transparency in a number of different ways, from the Department of Labor side of the house to the higher education side, or through multi-agency partnerships. So if you'd like to learn more about any of that, Jen can definitely answer more specific questions about the technology, and I'll also let her pipe in now and cover anything I've missed.
Yeah, thanks, Candace. Well, no, you did an excellent job describing everything. So I really appreciate that and the partnership that we've had together. And the slide with the example from Google is just that, an example. So, you know, the best analogy, as you were saying, is regardless of your preference when you travel, if you like Kayak, Expedia, Google, you'll still get the same results, just displayed in a different way for various audiences or preferences, because they have linked their data on the back end. They've got that linked open data infrastructure. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the world and the landscape of credentials. So appreciate that description as well. And then the Credential Finder as well, as it says there, it is a search app prototype. So we're not envisioning this being the be all end all, but rather just an example of how you can display this type of data. So ideally, you know, we encourage an open applications marketplace. You know, applications and tools can pull data from our registry using that linked open data for more customizable apps and tools, for example. So the Nebby widget, which I'm sure you'll talk about as well, and other tools and systems that we'll talk about here. And yes, as you see on the map, we've grown 22 states and several regions as well. And I'll put in the chat, we also wrote about the New England project and what we call a success story. So if you are interested in learning more about the work there, including Connecticut, I'll put that on the chat. And again, please insert any questions as well.
Thanks, Jen. So Sean, I'll pass it to you to talk more specifically about the work in Connecticut.
Sure, thank you, Candace. As Candace was explaining, NEBI was helping to implement this and guide states to adopting the Credential Registry, and in particular, taking the information that is available about credentials in different states, putting it in the Credential Transparency language, and then getting it onto the credential engine. And so NEBI started working with us here in Connecticut to attempt to do the same thing. The good news is that we already have some institutions that are already up on the Credential Registry, and here's a few examples here. Candace, you want to go to the next slide? So we had began some discussions last year about adopting Credential Registry in the state and what that would look like. It was a conversation between NEBI, OWS, the Office of Workforce Strategies, and OHE in terms of how to do that. And one of the results of that was a bill, public act that was passed, 21-2, sorry, which charged the Office of Higher Education with creating a database of credentials. And one of the purposes is to publish the credential information onto Credential Engine. And as some of you may know or are familiar, OHE has already had a inventory, what we called an inventory of credential information already. So OHE, through the stat, was charged with collecting all of the post-secondary credential information in the state from our independent institution, from all of our institutions of higher education, as well as our post-secondary occupational schools. What this legislative language did was to expand who we're collecting credential information from. So not only are we, as in the past, collecting information from institutions of higher ed and private occupational schools, but now we're also collecting credential information from the workforce boards, EPTL, community action agencies, ARC programs, alternative route to certification programs, and so on. So it does two things essentially. One is that it expands the amount of information that we are collecting about each credential. And there's a slide that's going to come up that just shows you the additional information we'll be collecting about credentials, but it also expands who we're collecting credentials from as well. And what would happen is that OHE will continue to collect this information, and we will be storing that information on our own OHE database. We are also in the process of updating what our database looks like, and I'll come back to that a little later. In collecting this information, we will have it housed here, but then we will also push that information to Credential Engine through hopefully an API. So the process would be relatively automatic. So whenever institutions update their information for OHE, OHE then kind of serves as a third-party publisher and pushes that information onto Credential Engine. And you will note that the way OHE may collect this information from you may be different from how it is presented on the registry, but our system will essentially translate the information that you have into the transparency language that will be pushed onto Credential Engine as well. Next slide. So this table here just shows what NEBI has done is propose a minimum data reporting for each credential. And that's listed here. The stuff in red are things that OHE currently collects, and then the stuff not in red is stuff that we would need to collect. So for example, there are things like the description of the credentials, where the web page is, who approves it, competencies. Some of the interesting things I'd point out, for example, and some for institutions to start thinking about are things like competencies and occupational types. Occupational types are related to the standard occupational codes that are published by the Federal Department of Labor, which basically categorizes different occupations into different codes. And it would be especially helpful to know where, like, what a particular credential is related to what kind of occupation at the end of it. And one of the reasons that that's an important thing to know about is, for example, the Department of Labor, the Connecticut Department of Labor uses that information to help guide visitors there. If they're interested in a certain occupation, for example, they want to be a psychologist or something, that can cross-link back to certain credentials and who offers those credentials. It's done right now at the Department of Labor, but there are some let's say some it could be cleaner, let's put it that way. So so having institutions kind of help direct what the proper codes would be helpful. So there's things like that, and then also things like estimated costs and earnings. Important that the credential registry has defined terms for all of these. They've defined what these are, and so, you know, when we look to collect this information from institutions, we'd also provide definitions of what these things mean to ensure that everybody's being consistent in terms of what's being reported to us. Candace? So we did a pilot with the CSCUs, and what we wanted to do was just to give a test run to see what it would look like, and on OHE's behalf, understand how Credential Engine works, how to publish data there, what it looks like, and so on. So we did a pilot study with the CSCUs between NEBI and OWS. They identified some high value credentials, and on our end, we collected the information we had about each of these credentials. We asked CSCU we asked the system office to provide the missing pieces of data. It wasn't, the data they provided wasn't everything that was on the table before, but it was most of, like, the absolute minimum data that we needed. We got that information and we published it July 15th. May have been an ambitious date. A little after July 15th, we published that data to Credential Engine, and it's up and running now. So all of the institutions, and Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, all of the public institutions aside from UConn should be up on Credential Engine, and then the credentials that we had identified are also up on Credential Engine. Understand that we will be requiring CSCU, as well as all other institutions of higher ed, to put all of their information, or we will be putting all of their information up on Credential Engine. But for the sake of the pilot, we did a subset just to see that we understand how it works and we can do it. All right, so as I mentioned before, we are working towards a new database solution. We are ambitiously hoping that this will get launched in October of 2021. It's based on the VOC system, because right now our academic affairs office is running off of an old old access database. Some of you may have been on the OHE website, and we have a academic search page that some of you may have used. You know, it's a little antiquated in terms of finding credentials and so on. So, and that whole thing's based off of access. So we're moving away from that, and we're moving into a newer system. We're building it out right now. It will be more, it will, one of the things is that it will be paperless. So no longer filling out forms and then sending it in to us. And then the other big thing is that it will be user driven is what I want to say. I don't know if that's the right term, but essentially, you know, the correct representative at each of the institutions can sign on to the VLC system, and depending on what they want to do, for example, if they wanted to add a new program or if they wanted to modify a program, click on the relevant link. They go in there, fill out the information that's needed, submit it to us. We'll do a quick approval if that's needed. Sometimes the approval just make sure everything looks correct. And then that gets published into our system, and then the system will publish that to Credential Engine. So our process is pretty automatic. And so we'll also, things like, we'll try to afford to have electronic payments available as well. So for functions like Sarah, NC Sarah, for folks, if we have NC Sarah folks on the line, will understand what that means. And then we will also, VOC also has a way of doing communications like a chat as well, so that we can keep a record of the back and forth between institutions and us, and there'll be a running record of what's going on, you know, for each application or form or whatever else that's there, so we can see what's going on. Next slide. All right, so I have a demo. We have a vendor here from VOC. His name's Dan Lynch. We didn't introduce him, but he's the most awesome person ever. He's going to do a quick understand, just as a caveat, that we're still building the plane here. So if it looks a little rough, is because it is a little rough, but it will get smoothed over time. But we wanted to, particularly for the exempt institutions that we have for program approval, show you a little bit of what some of the processes that you would most likely be doing on a regular basis look like in a rough way, just so you have a sense of what that looks like. And I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thanks so much. Yeah, my name is Dan Lynch. Everyone can hear me, right? I just want to make sure. All right. And are you seeing my screen too?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Dan Lynch. I work for VOC. We are a software platform. We are a no-code platform. So we are essentially, we build out processes for people like Sean and who have these old processes on paper, and we kind of try to automate it and, you know, make it easier for everybody involved here. So, you know, we specialize in emergency management, business continuity, but then we also do forms, applications, workflow processes, all that sort of stuff. So what you're looking at here, this would be kind of like your login page. And then, you know, we kind of go from there. So you have what's called an institution portal that you'll access for your applicable information here. So this is a test user. So this is, you know, supposed to be mimicking your exact, you know, user interface and what you'd kind of be seeing here. But as you come into VOC, you'll see this dashboard where it shows your programs that are active here. And then, you know, really what your actions are going to be. So if you have your modification phase out or submitting a new program, you know, these are the links that you would click to do that. So quickly, just to show you what, you know, the dashboard tile of your programs, you know, I have two here just because I, in the interest of time, didn't want to build out too many of them. But here it's just your simple information regarding each one of your programs. So you got your name, level, you know, codes, all that sort of stuff. And that's just kind of like the high level information. Here, you're not going to be able to edit anything. It's just a strictly a viewing portal at this point. When you go back to your dashboard, this is where you're going to be able to apply for those changes, and it'll go to Sean's team and make sure that, you know, everything looks good, and then make the changes, and then you could view, you know, the updated changes there. So when you come in to, you know, create a program modification, what the system will ask you to do is just to verify, you know, what institution you're part of. This is going to be applicable to you. So any institution that you're associated with will show up here. A lot of you will only have one, but if you have multiple, you would see multiple here, to be able to click in which one you're basically trying to make the changes to. Once you do that, you'll be able to select which program you're modifying, phasing out, or terminating right here under your list of programs. So same thing, you're going to see the list of programs. You select the one that you want to make the change to. All of that information that I just showed you is going to populate down here, and any way that any one that you want to make a change to, you would just click this little unlock button, change, we're going to say Dan's test program 3. Why not? And then any summary of the modifications that you're making there. Type modifications, and then it's as simple as that. You submit, and then what's going to happen is you're going to see it under your tile here, the program modification applications. So you can kind of see the status of that right now. It's in progress. It's under LNA review. And then once that's applied, you'll see that here of just, you know, it's completed or whatever to know that the changes that you requested were made. If there is any back and forth that you need to have, you know, you'll get an email saying like, hey, there's a question from Sean's team or something like that. You know, same thing for the phase out termination. Just gonna click on this again. Which one is being phased out, terminated? If you phase out, ask for a little bit of information, just what the teach out program is. Same information that's on the applications now, just all manual or all automatic here. Reason, and then here we just verify that, you know, no students are enrolled in the program anymore. And you do the same thing. You just submit that. If you do need to save it and come back to it later, you can do that, and that'll show up in that tile that I just showed. So what was that one? That was a phase out, right? It'll just say like a termination. So here you'll just see a draft status. So it's nothing was submitted yet. You know, just high level what these tiles all mean. And then, you know, same thing for submitting a new program. This is looks a little bit different, but what this does is ask for your institution. It verifies that you're an exempt institution, so then you could fill out this new program form. All that information that, you know, you have to fill out, and then it gets submitted to the team the same way as before. So you're just submitting all the applicable new program information. You can see here, if you have to upload any files, you can do that. You know, if you wanted to bullet stuff out, you can kind of have your text options here, paragraph options, uploading any images or files that are applicable to these form sections here. And then again, you know, it's going to go to, as soon as you submit it, it goes to Sean's team for their review. Here you'll see your program form here that you can come back in and make any changes to before you submit the whole application to Sean and his team. You can leave any comments that you need to here. And then once you submit, that goes to Sean and his team for their review. I think that was everything I had. I mean, you know, same processes for accreditation licensures and stuff like that. I think a lot of the exempt schools won't have to deal with that, but that was just kind of high level of what VOC does and how it looks and how it feels. And, you know, anything else that you want me to run over here, Sean? Or
No, I think that's great, Dan. Thank you.
awesome. You're very welcome. Do we want to do questions now or wait for those? And
We can, if there's any immediate questions, feel free to use the Q&A box. Otherwise, we can wait till the end and then answer those questions there. And then we'll be on in case we needs to do any other little demos so you can see what that looks like.
Yep. Thank you.
While Candace is flipping back to the slide here, I did just a quick question. There are two questions in the box here. Let's do these really quick. One is To be clear, OHE will feed the data to Credential Engine. The answer is yes, OHE will be feeding the data. Previously, OHE would not have collected non-credit credentials. We will be collecting non-credit credentials as part of the legislation that was passed, and we will collect that information through VOC through a similar process. We'll have forms available, and then you can put that information into the forms and upload it into VOC, and we will push that information onto Credential Engine. Other question is, will we submit annual reports through this process? The answer to that is yes. So I'm assuming that's referring to the annual inventory exercise that we do. We'll make that process available through VOC as well. It should be a lot simpler. You can just go through your list of credentials that are associated with your institution and then make the relevant changes, and it will just get put in there, and then we will review and approve on our end. So it should be a much more streamlined process for that. And just to reiterate, so one of the things, and one of the reasons why we wanted to do this is we're not looking to start collecting additional information about the about your credentials for Credential Registry until after we've gone live with our new system, in part because it's going to be a lot easier to collect this information than to try to do it now, which will get very messy with Excel spreadsheets and so on. So we're waiting until we're live with VOC and then look to do that. But on the institution side, as you saw from the table, I think there are two buckets of information about credentials. There are things that are probably readily available that would be easy for you to put into the database because it's probably the information is probably centralized or easy to access. And then there's other information about your credential which will require some further insight. So if I had to guess, one of the things might be around occupation type, which would require, thinking about what kind of code is this particular credential associated with, which would require, or competencies, for example, which would require a little further investigation. Our plan is to collect information on a phased basis. So, we'll get the more readily available information first, and then the more difficult information, look to get that later. The end goal is to get all of the information that we have outlined about each credential so that we can make that available. So once that's up, we haven't quite built out what that thing will look like, but essentially you will, pick your credential, and then there will be fields available to fill in the information about that credential, and then you would submit that to us, and then we would translate that information and publish it to the Credential Registry. Candace, next slide. Let me just run through these a little bit. So these are some questions to think about when getting started. Do you store all of the information? Where is it stored? How would you collect this information? How would you, what's your existing capacity to manage the credential program data, particularly a point person who will be interacting with the VOC system and putting the information in on there would be helpful. So as Dan mentioned, each institution will have one or more users that are authorized to go in and basically do the different forms and so on for their, who's that person going to be, and manage that information and so on. And then thinking about how you can use the information that gets published on Credential Engine for your benefit as well. Next slide, I think.
All
Sean,
right.
there were a couple questions in the chat about the VOC workflow. I don't know if you want to take a look at those.
Sure. So question, does the VOC workflow support collecting the different approvals at my institution? It will not. It will not capture your own internal workflow process. We are only doing it after everything's already approved at the institution and you're ready to let OHE know what that is, if I'm reading that question correctly. Does VOC allow a document version of my institution's forms? I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but in various places there is the ability to upload documents. So if there are places where there's further documentation needed associated with the credential, there will be the ability to upload documents on there.
Yeah, Sean, I could probably take that one too. My guess is that they're asking if they put the information into VOC, can they print it out in a certain way? Yes, the answer to that is yes. You'll be able to print out the information that you put into VOC.
One just point I would make more broadly here is I think the one opportunity here that we have to make, we have a little more work to do on our end on is the ability to integrate the credential registry into other existing systems in Connecticut. We being, the Governor's Workforce Council and the Office of Workforce Strategy, we're very focused right now on kicking off the design of a new workforce technology system that would be administered at the state level. We are very close to selecting a vendor for this process, and that workflow or that journey will include a series of systems for a user to interact with, to explore careers and occupations and pathway programs. And this, I think, is an integral piece of that. It really can be integrated from a technical standpoint so that if a user wants to access that system, they can readily leverage the credential registry or they would fill out a survey and it would say, hey, I'm interested in software development. What are all the software development programs that I can take or enroll into in Connecticut? And it would link to the registry, and the registry would show you in your location, based off of your specific needs, what are the best software development programs for you. So just to put this into a broader context, this is, I think, a really powerful tool to guide students, especially, but again, all types of users, policymakers, businesses, et cetera, to the different programs that are out there, really at the credential level, which is the important piece here. Everything is differentiated between a BA, an associate's, a certificate, et cetera, et cetera. So, we really want to make this all encompassing, and just wanted to mention that to put it in the framework of the larger sort of system development, because I think it's a really important piece.
Thanks, Niall. I had another question here with regards to all right, I have two questions here. Let me just read them out. To clarify, the legislation does not require higher ed institutions to report industry or occupation codes if they're not applicable to a degree or credential. The legislation doesn't specify exactly all of the data elements for each of the credentials. I think it leaves it up to us to kind of determine what those are, or it makes reference to the minimum data policy. So ideally, there should be something. I will say this is that, you know, at the end of the day, back to Niall's point, is that the more information we have, the more we can be helpful to Connecticut residents in terms of if they want to get a certain type of educational experience, that they can do so. So if we do have credentials that don't identify an occupational code, I mean, certainly you can do that, but then if somebody's searching for something, then those credentials wouldn't pop up because we wouldn't have that link between the two things. So as much as institutions can provide the necessary information is as much as institutions are selling those credentials to folks that will be interested in looking at it. So I hope that answers that question. There's another question with regards to um, confirmation of state approvals for the purposes of Title IV. And so the academic program search that we have on our website right now also serves a function if the U.S. Department of Ed is looking to see if a particular program is approved through the state, they would go through the academic program search to do so. And that function will still remain. I envision that OHE will still publish a list of approved credentials on our website powered by VOC that that the U.S. Department of Ed can do a search on to identify if that's a approved program or not through the state.
And I just want to add briefly from, the higher level credential engine perspective, what we've learned, we've only been around a few years, but we've learned, historically, credential and competency data is very siloed, right? But Connecticut is one of our first state partners to show through legislation that credential transparency is a legislative priority. And when you put it in writing like that, it really does, again, allow for all these opportunities, as Niall was speaking to, pathways, transfer value, all the various opportunities that come with credential transparency and putting it in that legislation that I think is really very powerful.
Yeah, and I would emphasize Sean's point earlier on in the instance where the industry or occupational code might not tie to a degree or credential, it's still it still would be valuable to have that information reported on the registry, because we still, again, we want it to be the one-stop shop for all educational and workforce training programs that are offered in the state. Ideally, everything is neatly tied to a credential, but we realize that it's never that simple. But I think that really is the goal here. And again, there's a much larger kind of web that this system falls into that makes it so important that as many programs as possible are reported, because it will be incorporated into a much larger user journey for, let's just use a student as an example. So we really want it to be as encompassing, all encompassing as possible. I think one additional point that I would add, and I want to give a shout out to Jen Woodness on this, because I think it's a really good point. One thing that I think our team should work on is just additional definitions of the fields to really make sure that every institution is clear on what it is that we're asking for. I think the legislation was not terribly clear, I would say, on the actual definitions. And I think, we can help provide additional details to really define the specific fields that we're looking for, to make sure that everyone is reporting the same thing. Because the last thing we want is for people to misinterpret a field name, for example. It sounds very minute, but it could actually make a difference. Interpret a field name incorrectly, and then we start getting inconsistent data. So I think just from our team's end, we will work on kind of like a data dictionary, data definitions, just to make sure everyone is on the same page in terms of what we're asking for. So please be on the lookout for that at some point. But it's a really good point that Jen brought up earlier. So just to flag that for the larger group here.
I just wanted to say too, there, it is a ask to provide some additional information about each of your credentials, as well as providing non-credit credentials that you have not previously been supplying to OHE. And after this call or something else, if there are additional questions, certainly feel free to reach out to us directly and discuss it. One of the good things is that we're still building the system, and one of the questions I'm tackling is how to build a system to afford for the best reporting of information to us. I'll give you an example. For example, does it make sense to have one centralized person that enters all of the information into OHE's database, or does it make sense that there might be one person that enters the basic information, and then there's another person, or there are other people that could fill in some of the more specifics about a credential? So for example, things like competencies or occupations or so on, that could be delegated at the department level, and the department fills in that additional information there instead of having it centralized, which may create, larger data requirements. So I'm still kind of playing around with that and not sure what the best approach is. And I'm certainly open to talking to individuals at different institutions to understand how might be the best way to get some of this information in the quickest and least effort way possible. So I'm looking forward. If folks want to have that conversation, I'm definitely looking forward to having that. There's a question here about how will the occupational coding handle credentials in areas like English or history that do not prepare one for specific type of job? Seems like these codes could be very limiting. Candace or Jen, I don't know if either one of you want to handle that question.
I'll take a first stab, which is to say that you at the institutions are still very much the owners and attributors of this data to your programs. So this is in some of these fields will be up to you to decide how you would like to represent your programs. And I think this is an area where that applies. There's not you're not limited to a certain number of occupational codes per credential. So I think the point is well taken that English and history majors end up in all types of occupations. So that's one way to think about it. Jen, I know you've heard this question and have examples of how people think about this.
I have, and that's exactly right what you just said. In addition to that, our registry can also be flexible. For example, we have ways where what you're looking for may not match the exact field. However, you could type in a description or something that helps you clarify what you're trying to say, even though if it's not that exact field. So we do have ways, and our CTDL, we do consider a living language. So if there is a term or a field, for example, that isn't included, we could consider adding that as well. So yes, we're a resource to you too. We work very closely, obviously, with Sean and Candace and Niall. And so any type of feedback is always welcome.
So I just wanted to add to that. This is currently being done at the Connecticut Department of Labor. They have a Career Connections website, which links occupational codes with zip codes. And I guess it's a question of who controls the narrative. So if if you leave things blank, for example, then you're leaving it up to us to give our best guess about where things might fall. So the more guidance you can give about your credentials and how you wanted it marketed, you know, perhaps the way that you build a certain English program makes it better for folks that want to be writers or something else like that. I'm not sure, but you know, and that may not be true, but again, to Candace's point, you can put several different types of occupations in there, but just think about, you know, what kind of student are you looking for to enter this type of program, and you know, what should they be expecting after they graduate. So I guess I'm doing the Q&A, so I'll just go through. And if it's not me, I'll ask somebody to jump in on it. Have versions of this been up and running long enough in other states to generate usage data, who's logging in and so on? So I'll turn it over to Jen.
Versions of the registry, I'm assuming. So Credential Engine became a nonprofit in 2017. So that's about as long as we've been around. I'm not entirely sure about usage data. Again, like I said, our credential finder, we don't want that to be that type of tool. It really is just an example. However, certain states like Indiana, they have been our partner for the longest. They have a tool that they integrate with registry data that perhaps they might have some of that user data that helps students and job seekers find the information they need. So that's kind of the best answer I can provide to that question.
I will just add, you know, again, orienting back to the larger system that we're building, there will certainly be usage data captured on that larger system. So in one form or another, we will be tracking usage of this to some degree. So while there may not be something readily accessible, I would certainly defer to Jen on that. But from a Connecticut perspective, we definitely will be tracking the usage of this and the larger system that we're building. And you know, if we see it, if there are flags that we think need to be addressed, we will certainly address them. But we will definitely be flagging that on our side.
Niall, did you want to tackle the next question about Google AdWords?
Yeah, I think that's something that is a capability for the larger system that we're building to have that functionality incorporated. So that we are just not at that stage yet in the process, but that certainly is a functionality that we could pursue. So I know I'm seeing anonymous attendee as the person, whoever, if they want to follow up with me individually, happy to have that conversation. But again, that it is a functionality. We are just not at that stage yet where we're defining sort of those usages, but we can certainly have that discussion.
Thanks, Niall. Last question I have up here is, what's the timeline for the registry data collection? So there's nothing that's going to happen before October on our end in terms of requesting data from you. My suggestion would be, in the meantime, to start thinking about how would be the best way to collect some of the information that the registry requires that you do not collect right now, and how best that might work at your institution, and understand what that workflow might look like. Again, if there's ways that we can construct the database that would help facilitate that in an efficient manner, please have those conversations with me. We're building the ship right now, so it's easy to change things now as opposed to later. So I'd really appreciate any insight institutions have on that. After October, fingers crossed, and I push Dan really hard enough, we'll have the system up and running. And at that point, like I said, we're going to try a phased approach. First phase would be trying to collect information that's more readily available at the institution level. I'm not sure what that timeline might be like. Let's say 3 months or something. don't hold me to that, but we'll figure something out. And then a second phase where we're trying to get the more difficult to access or reach information onwards. Now, when does the legislation say it's not effective from this July 1st, but when does it start? I want to say 2023. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no later than January 1st, 2023 is when this is the date assigned to this.
So we're looking to have everything full-fledged running, collecting all of the information we can by January 1st of 2023.
Yeah, I would emphasize the flexibility. I mean, that date is important, but one thing that we learned with our pilot with CSCU, which I realize is, different in a lot of ways than what we're dealing with here, but I think there are some important learnings, one of which was it certainly varied by institution what the capabilities were. And, we have a flexible process here with now that, Dan is helping and, the larger system that OHE is building, I think will really help facilitate that. But just know that there is flexibility, I would say, just broadly on the timelines. While, we will obviously hold ourselves accountable to January 1, 2023, but the way we get there, we can really be flexible on to accommodate the specific needs of the individual institutions. So I do want to emphasize that point. I think it's important. I will note, just for everyone to know here, I realize this is a little bit different than our kind of private colleges, but again, just for transparency, we are working, our kind of next phase after this is going to be some smaller workforce training programs. So like our private occupational schools, additional nonprofit training providers. We're even looking at getting apprenticeships and other work-based learning programs uploaded to the registry. So just know that those are all things in the works. And I realize that's not totally relevant for the folks on this call, but I think it's important to emphasize that, again, we are trying to take a very comprehensive approach to what's being uploaded to the registry. So just know that that's sort of our next phase from our team's side. Okay, shall we?
Yeah. And conclude by saying, please feel free to reach out to any of us with questions, comments, and concerns. I'm sure Sean will send a follow-up email with contact info in the slide deck and the link to this session for future reference. So
Thank you,
thanks
everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
Looking forward to working with you all.
Bye.
Take care.